Hello everybody, happy Wednesday. Everybody should be doing this lesson at home today, so you'll all be watching at the same time. Before we do anything on percentages today, I just want to have a quick reminder of multiplying, but particularly dividing by 10 and 100. And if you remember, we use place value charts for this. A lot of us use the sliding ones because we found it easier. So just to remind you to multiply by 10, although we won't be doing that today. Let's say we've got 42. The number 10 has 1 0 on the end, and that 1 0 tells us how many places to move our digits, which is just the 1. So our 10, because we're getting bigger, we're multiplying, so we're getting bigger, our 4 will move one place into the hundreds column, and our 2 will move one place into the tens column. So the 4 will come into here, the 2 will come into here. And of course we must remember that we cannot leave our ones column empty. We have to fill our ones column. And because we don't have any ones, we're going to put a placeholder in, a 0. To multiply a number by 100, let's start again. Let's have a different number this time. So 36. 100 has got 2 zeros on the end, so we're going to move our digits 2 places. So our digit in the tens column is going to go into the thousands column, and our 6 here is going to move 2 places to the hundreds column, and then of course we've got 2 columns to fill up with placeholders. Remember, we have to have something in our ones column and our tens column if necessary. We can't leave them empty. Okay, that's multiplying by 10. And of course the same thing would apply if we started with 4.2 and we multiplied by 10. So we're moving it one place. We've moved the 4 over here. The 2, remember the decimal point column does not count because it doesn't ever move. So our 2 would jump over that into our ones column. So 4.2 times 10 is 42. Okay, that's the wrong button. There we go, clear ink. That's what I wanted to do, except it's now revealed that that shouldn't be units, it should be ones. This is an old chart. Okay. Dividing is exactly the same thing, but we're going in the opposite direction. So 42 divided by 10. Again, there's only 1 0 on the end of 10, so we move it one place to the right. And if we have, let's say, 420 divided by 10, the 4 would move to here, the 2 would move to here, and we just drop off the 0. There's no point putting 42.0 because there aren't any tenths, so it's just 42. We can get rid of it. If you already have 4.2, you would then move the 4 to here, the 2 to here, and again you've got to fill up your ones column to show that you've got something. And then if you had one more example, if you had 0.42, the 2 would move over here, the 4 would move over here, and then we've got to have 2 placeholders, 0.042. Okay, so that's just a bit of a revision because you will need that later. So, yesterday we looked at finding percentages of 100. And this graphic here shows you how easy that is. And we compared them to fractions and decimals. So 100% is 1. And that's both as a fraction and a decimal. 75%, if you remember, was 75 over 100, which is the same as 3/4, and is also 0.75. 50% is 0.5. I've done the decimal first this time. Or 50 over 100, which is the same as 1/2. The pen I'm using, by the way, isn't very good. It doesn't line up very well, which is why everything's so messy. I don't have an Apple pen. I can't use it on this iPad anyway, so it's just a cheap one, and it doesn't line up. 25%, 0.25. Remember all these patterns, or 25 out of 100, or 1/4. 10%, we did start to look at this one, is the same as 10 over 100, or 1/10. That is supposed to be a 0 there. 1/10, or 0.1. Now this one, 1%, is 1 out of 100. And we can't simplify that one. That's as simple as it will go. And our decimal, if you remember, is 0.01. And those were the ones I said to watch out for when you did that colouring activity in yesterday's work. So hopefully you were okay on all those. So that was out of 100. But what if these numbers were out of a different number? So these percentages were out of a different number. So if we know that 50% is 1/2 of 100 when we want 100, what about if we want 50% of 200? We know 50% is 1/2. So can we work out what 50% of 200 is? What's 1/2 of 200? 100. So 50% of 200, what I should have done there is put 50% of 200 equals 100. And remember, we can also say 50% times 200 equals 100. Of and times do the same thing. So can we work out 25% of 200? So to do 25, if you remember, we're dividing it by 4. Or halving and halving again. I've already worked out half here. So all I need to do is halve it again. So 25%, and I'm going to do times this time, just to mix them up a bit, times 200 is 1/2 of 100, it's 50. I can get 4 lots of 50 in 200. So 25%, 1/4 of 200 is 50. Well, 100%, we know that's the whole. So 100% of 200 is all of it. So that equals 200. 75%, that's 1/2 and 1/4 added together. So 75% is 100, that's our 1/2, add 50. That's our 1/4. So 75% of 200 is 150. 10%. Now, do you remember what we just did with the place value chart? So we want to divide 200 by 10. Let's actually write that correctly, shall we? So we want to do 200 divided by 10. So if we were to move our numbers on our place value chart to get them smaller, the 2 would move into the tens column, that 0 would move into the ones column, and we would lose that one off the end. So 200 divided by 10 is 20, which means 10% of, or times, 200 is 20. 1% we need to divide by 100. Again, think about what we just did with our place value chart. So if we've got 200, we're going to divide and we're going to move the digits twice. So the 2 would go from the hundreds to the tens to the ones column. The rest of it can go, the rest of the zeros, because they'll be in the decimals. So it's just 2. So that's when it's 200. But we might have a slightly harder number. Let's say 420. Now, I chose this one because we looked at it on the place value chart. So let's first of all look at 100%. That's our whole thing, so that we've already got the 100%. It's there. What about 50%? Remember, 50% is the same as a half. So all we've got to do is halve 420. Half of 400 is 200. Half of 20 is 10. Add those together. So 50% is 210. 25%, that's half of my half. Or divide my whole number by 4, but I think it's easier to half my half. So half of 200 is 100, half of 10 is 5. Add those together, 105. 75% is a half, add a quarter. So it's these two added together. Easy. 200 and 100 is 300, 10 and 5 is 15. So it's 315. Okay, we also had 10%. Now we should be able to do this one from our place value earlier. We're dividing this number by 10. So the 2 will move to the 1s, the 4 will move to the 10s, sorry. And we can knock off the 0 from the decimal column. So it's 42. And then for 1%, we're dividing by 100. So our 0 will move into the decimal column. Sorry, it won't, because we were divided by 100. I've just divided by 10. The 0 will move into the tenths and then the hundredths. The 2 will move into the ones and then the tenths. And the 4 will move into the tens and then the ones. You can do that on a place value chart if you need to, which would give me 4.20. But we don't need the last 0, as we spoke about the other day. And you remember, that was one of the things that we had to notice that was wrong with one of the calculations. We don't need that 0 on the end unless it's money. So that is how we'd find 420. Let's try a bigger number. Let's try a number in the thousands. I'm going to do 5,000. Actually, no, I'm going to do 6,443. So we've got a bigger number now. We might have to even write down some of our calculations. 50%, that's half of this number. Okay, I'm going to do a bit of a cherry diagram here. Half of 6,000 is 3,000. Half of 400 is 200. Half of 40 is 20. Half of 3. Now 3 is an odd number, so I can't halve it exactly. I'm going to have to do a decimal. Half of 3 is 1.5. So now, to find the half of the whole thing, I need to add those together. 300 add 200 is 3,000. Sorry, 3,000 add 200 is 3,200. Add 20. So we've got 3,220, 1.5. 3,221.5. 3,221.5. Now, this is going to get a bit tricky on our 25% because we're going to have to end up halving our 0.5. This is going to be a bit trickier. Again, let's try a cherry diagram. Half of 3,000 is 1,500. I know that because I know half of 30 is 15. Half of 200 is 100. I'm going to need to add those. Half of 20 is 10. This is where it gets a bit tricky. Half of 1 is 0.5, and half of 0.5 is a quarter, which is 0.25. So these three, the first three are easy. So we've got 1,610. So those three make 1,610. Now I've got to add the decimals. Well, this is a half and this is a quarter. Added together, that makes 3/4. And I know that 3/4 is 0.75. So if we add those together, we get 1,610.75. 1,610.75. I'm just going to write that up here before I forget. There we go. All right, let's get rid of the rest of this. Obviously, you don't need to rub things out like I do. I like to see you're working out. Okay, 75%. Now we've got to add these two together. Let's do some column addition. Remember to line your columns up neatly. Okay, so there's an imaginary placeholder 0 there. So 0 add 5 is 5. 7 add 5, that's 12. We don't carry into the decimal point column. Don't forget to bring the decimal point column. 1 add 1, 2 add 1, 6 add 2. Lovely. 4,832.25. Okay, now 10%. Divide this by 10. So all our digits are going to move one place to the right. So our answer is going to be 644.3. And for 1%, we divide by 100, so we move all of these 2 places. So our answer will be 64.43. Okay. This is a bit tricky, but what you're doing today is finding percentages of numbers. As far as I remember, you're only going to be finding these percentages here. So use the tricks I've shown you. So just to remind you, 50% halve the number. 25% halve your half, or divide by 4. 75%, you want to do the half, add the quarter, or the 50%, add the 25%. 10%, divide by 10. 1%, divide by 100. So just try and remember those rules. As an extra challenge, if you want something a bit trickier, I want to know how many different ways you can find out 75% of a number. This is more of a challenge if you find the work easy. You don't have to do this. So, for example, I've taught you to add the half and the quarter, which is the same as adding 50% and 25%. Another way you could do it is 100% take away 25%. You could also find a tenth and then another tenth and then another tenth 7 times and then find 5%. How would you find 5%? If you already know 10%, can you find 5%? If you know 10%, can you find 20%? Can you find 30%? So as an extra challenge, how many ways can you find 75%? How many ways can you work it out? I've given you 2, and I've told you a different way as well. Is there any other ways? I mean, you could find 1% 75 times. It's a slow way of doing it, but you could do it that way. Okay, so have fun with that one. This work here is a little bit tricky, but just remember the rules. 50% is half. 20% is half of a half. 75% is a half, add the quarter. or 50% add 25%, 10% divide by 10, 1% divide by 100. Have a go at those, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye, everybody.